Blessings, beloveds. I'd like to talk about the goddess Vesta today. She's been calling me, so to speak. So I love talking about the asteroids, as you know, lots of you are aware, and there's actually thousands and thousands and thousands of asteroids. However, we don't use all of them because it would just become an overwhelming sort of perspective on your chart, and it just wouldn't really make much sense. So there are lots of reasons as to why you would use this one over this one, and so on and so forth. But today's video is not about that. Today's video is about Vesta, the goddess Vesta, who is a very sacred symbol actually in the chart. She's probably one of the more complex, most mystical, occult type of figures out of the divine feminine archetypes. And she in essence, and I'm going to describe some themes and characteristics about the energy that is contained within her. But fundamentally, she speaks to the component of our soul, and that component of our soul that we are, whether consciously or otherwise, trying to understand better and connect more deeply with. And Vesta, because of her principle of focus, enables us to bring that energy, bring it and harness it in one particular direction. So she's the principle of focus, devotion, dedication. She corresponds to, well, I might as well read off these keywords now since I've gone down that path. Soul work. She's the symbol of the fire, the flame, the hearth, which is that centeredness within. So she corresponds to that centeredness within ourselves that we try to stand with or integrate or embrace in our lives. She's self-contained, self-reliant. She corresponds to centeredness, purification, self-discipline, personal integration. She's unmarried. So she's that specific term refers to her being married to herself, as it were. I'll explain a bit more about that in a moment. It's the principle of transmutation of sexual energy, sexual force, transmutation of that. She corresponds to psychic development, the sacrifice of our own personal pleasure in order to obtain a deeper relationship with our own soul. She corresponds to the Dharma component of our life. She also corresponds to sisters. This is something that is very rarely mentioned. In fact, I've never heard anyone mention it, but she absolutely corresponds to sisters. So when you see her prominently placed in your chart or in someone else's chart, and what's a prominent position? Well, there are many ways that could be assessed or defined. So just very simple, some very simple ideas would be, of course, if she's conjunct or aspected very closely to one of your personal planets, for instance, that brings her into tremendous focus in your own psyche. I have her conjunct my Mars in the 12th house, and she's been such a big part of my life story and my sexual energy and what I do with that, and particularly so because she's conjunct the planet Mars, which is also a planet that corresponds to my own personal desires, passion, sexual energy, and so forth. So it's a bit of a double signature for me. And without going into, you know, very private and personal details, I can tell you that I have gone through many periods in my life of celibacy, and that's with conscious intention at times, and other times it just happens organically. And that's not something that I'm uncomfortable about. That's something that is very easy for me, actually. And she enables us to tap into that component of our psyche where we can tune into the sexual force, the sexual energy, which is one of the most powerful energies that exists within all of us. And when we learn how to harness that and integrate it and purposely use it in a way that is directed in a very specific way, there's a lot that can be accomplished. I mean, the most simple and common example is individuals who embark on a spiritual journey where they part of that journey does involve being completely celibate. And I'm not here to say whether that's right or wrong, or whether you have to do that. Not at all. It's up to the individual. But there is something to be said for containing that sexual force and sexual energy and being very specific in how you focus it. There's lots of teachings and lots of material historically that speaks to the holding back of that sexual energy and sexual force for the purposes of elevating our soul, our spiritual understanding, our spiritual practices, and our spiritual life, because there is something extremely powerful within our sexual field and force. I mean, let's face it, you know, it is through that sexual force and sexual energy that creation is born, right? So that's how powerful it is. So for those of you that are very interested in working with, you know, your sexual spiritual energy, Kundalini, she actually corresponds to the base in our chakra system that resides right at the back, the bottom, the base chakra, which is where we have enormous sexual energy. And it is said that when we practice certain practices in order to wake up the snake, as it were, up through our spine, which is that Kundalini energy, she's basically the goddess that speaks to that journey. And that's because she's self-contained, self-reliant. She's about purification, being centered, you know. The opposite to that would be to be just, you know, completely distracted and, you know, having your energy and field sort of engaged in anything and everything, being all over the place, your field being contaminated, you're not even realizing it. And that can be sexually, and that can just be also mentally, you know, emotionally, with how much you're pouring out of yourself, you know, into others or into situations without really thinking about it, you know. And then the way you sort of perhaps come to the understanding that I've gone too far with that, I've given too much of my energy into this person or that situation or whatever. We come to that realization because of the sheer experience of feeling depleted. And so when we have powerful Vesta transits, which there is a very powerful Vesta transit at the moment, and there has been all year, and I'll break that down in a minute. What happens is she reminds us of the necessity to withdraw and retreat in order to replenish our soul, to replenish our sexual force and energy, so that we can basically reconnect and recenter back into our own flame, heart, soul centeredness, right? So she's a very powerful goddess for these reasons. Now, she's been forming a conjunction to Saturn virtually all year, sort of in and out. She was in Capricorn very early this year, so she was right there with Pluto. And then by March, she ingressed into Aquarius on the 12th of March, actually. She ingressed into Aquarius. Then by May, she hopped into Pisces, but then went retrograde. And so she went back into Aquarius and has been in Aquarius since around about July. So a couple of days ago, on the 5th of October, she stationed direct. So she was retrograde, right, from July. And just a couple of days ago, she stationed direct at about 20-something of Aquarius. And in amongst this journey, she's caught up with Saturn. She's moved away from Saturn, and she's caught up with Saturn again. And now, because she's changed directions, moving direct, she's going to move away from Saturn. And by 21st of November next month, she goes back into Pisces, which is where she tracked the early degrees of Pisces earlier this year, around about mid-year. And so now she's going to go back into Pisces and complete that journey. And that will take her a few months as well, because she will not leave Pisces until about 9th of February of 2023. So let me just back up. One other thing to really sort of notice here with this transit is that her conjunction with Saturn is quite profound, actually. The main reason for that is because Saturn, who is also known as Kronos, is her father. And in myth, when Saturn swallowed all his children, which he did, she was the first one to go in and the last one to come out. So what that means is that she spent the longest time ingested in his stomach, as it were. And what that really speaks to on a symbolic level is the component to her that corresponds to being on her own and really doing some very deep and private work, and being isolated in a way, right? Her focus is to the exclusion of everything else. So when you're working with Vesta energy, that is the archetype that corresponds to that discipline that we might need to invest, right? The word investment comes from the word Vesta, from the goddess Vesta. So anything we invest in is a Vesta type of experience. And when we do it in that pure holistic manner with focused intention, we are drawing from the goddess Vesta, which enables us to achieve certain goals, complete certain objectives, and create very specific intentions that we will apply the discipline that's required in order to proceed in that path and ultimately accomplish what we are seeking to accomplish. She has a lot of complexities around her regarding sexual energy and sexual interaction, sexual exchange. You know, when we go back into the myth of the Vestal virgins, which were all the priestesses back in the time, they were unmarried, and they were called Vestal virgins, which, for those that don't understand the mythology of the story, might incorrectly assume that these women were virgins and that Vesta was a virgin. They were virgins, but not in the typical way that we perceive or understand the word virgin. They were not barren of sharing their sexual energy. They in fact, quite the opposite. What they did was they used their sexual energy for the purposes of healing, right? So they freely gave of themselves for the purposes of healing. And they would they'd have these cyclical sort of periods where they would go out and they would give all their sexual energy focused in one very specific direction. That meant being completely free and uninhibited and not belonging to anyone but themselves, because they chose to do that. That's the difference. They made that choice and they did not attach themselves or belong to anybody or anything. So they would do that, and then they would come back and they would go through a process of replenishing and cleansing and purifying through certain rituals and measures and things that they engaged in. And that vastly included withdrawal process, withdrawal from everything and everyone. So psychologically, Vesta speaks to that component of ourself in our life where we may be giving a lot of ourself and our energy, whether that's sexually or otherwise, into a particular personal situation or project or whatever it may be. And then we need to come to a point where we realize, okay, now it's time to pull back and clear our field, clear that energy, conserve it, replenish it, regenerate it, and prepare for the next stage or next process of giving it back out into another person, situation, project, etc. again. So that's what Vesta transits do. They take us through these cyclical journeys and processes, particularly when she's aspecting something significant in your chart by a transit, or even just with Saturn and Vesta being conjunct virtually the whole year, which again, as I said, is an interesting combination because it is her father, and she does speak to celibacy in certain ways. And so there's a sense of denial as well that goes on with Vesta, because when, if you want to become a professional gymnast, for example, right, just to use a simple example, you are going to have to sacrifice so much to achieve becoming, a champion on that scale that you're wanting to achieve. If you want to become a world gymnast sort of champion, right? That will involve, training 6 days a week, a very specific diet, not being able to really socialize and go out and drink and get off your face and whatever, right? So there's a sacrifice immediately implied when one chooses to become to reach that kind of professionalism, right? And it's not just with athletics, it can be with lots of other different things as well. The point being that when you do choose to focus your energy at something very specific, it is a Vesta type of experience because you are investing yourself in something. There's an objective there, there's something you're trying to achieve, but it is at the exclusion of lots of other different things. That's why it requires self-discipline. You can't be a gymnast or an elite, athlete of some kind if you don't have that capacity to be disciplined. And this is what Vesta speaks to. That's why we have keywords like self-contained, self-reliant, married to herself, centeredness. You need those sorts of qualities when you are choosing a particular path that requires so much discipline to the exclusion of all the other things, Conjunct Saturn is an interesting one because Saturn also implies limitations, denial, boundaries, separation, discipline, hard work. So, at a really optimum elevated level, the conjunction to Saturn could have really enabled our journey in a very specific pathway where we have focused our energy towards something that we've really wanted to cultivate and achieve, whether that's consciously working with our own sexual energy and spiritual practices and kundalini energy, or whether that's just something very specific in your life in a particular field that you've been very focused on. And Saturn as the disciplinarian, which she too is a disciplinarian, the combination of those two forces together are extremely powerful, as you can imagine, right? So harnessing that energy in a very specific way can yield very powerful results. So let me just actually bring up the chart just for now. I've got Jeffrey Dahmer there and Hedy Lamarr and Colin Wilson, and I might just briefly mention them in a minute. So this chart is for the 8th of October, and as you can see, there's the moon at 21 of Pisces, preparing to create the opposition to the sun in 2 days' time, where we're going to have a full moon. Last night I woke up some odd hour, which I typically do, and I came to my balcony, and there I saw the moon, which looked practically full, but it wasn't, of course, but it's so close so that it looked extremely illuminated. And I saw Jupiter right there as well. You can see Jupiter and the moon are pretty close together, right? So it was quite a beautiful vision in the setting western side of the sky, which is where my balcony faces, and fortunately there were no clouds, so I had this gorgeous view. And that was just a beautiful little moment, which got me thinking about a few things. I know I've digressed a bit from Vesta, but I'll get back to her, because I just want to say as well that yesterday there was a pretty tragic thing that occurred in Thailand, and it's very severe and very horrific. A guy went into a childcare centre and slaughtered 37 people. 24 of them were just little kids, and he was an ex-cop too. So I did say in my full moon video that this Chiron being conjunct the moon is not an easy energy, and it wouldn't surprise me if we see something pretty severe on the collective field, because the moon rules the masses and Chiron is deep pain and wounds. And so the full moon hasn't even hit, and there's already been 2 incidences. That's one of them. There was another one a few days ago as well in Indonesia, where 125 people were killed, and I mentioned that over a football game. So this is that Chiron moon energy reflecting on the collective sphere, the sadness and pain and injury that's inflicted through the archetype of Aries being ruled by Mars, which is the god of war and anger and violence, etc. And when we are dealing with souls on the planet that are projecting through the personality in a completely unhinged and fractured manner, it's not uncommon to see these sorts of things occur, particularly around full moons. Full moons just bring things to a culmination, as it were, that they just highlight what's sort of been building up and what sort of was hidden, if you like, right? So that's a very sad occurrence, but that just happened yesterday, and I put that down to the Chiron conjunct the full moon in Aries without question. So getting back to Saturn and Vesta, there they are there. Let me just grab a little a little highlighter. So there's Saturn at 1846, very shortly to go direct. Vesta now is at 2259. She went direct, as I said, on the 5th of October, so she's now starting to separate, move away from Saturn, but she's still within proximity of being conjunct Saturn. So if you can think back, and one might think, well, isn't it a bit late to look? It's never too late, because in fact, the retrospect perspective on transits that have occurred, or cycles that you're observing or whatever it is, you should always look back and see what was activated for you or integrated, or what came into your awareness or field of experience relative to that transit, because that's how you learn astrology. Number one, observation, correlation. And that's how you learn what's going on in your own chart and what's going to be activated at any given time and why that might be the case. Because your chart it's the blueprint of your soul, and there are layers upon layers upon layers, and not everything is active all the time, right? So there are very specific moments in time where various components of your chart will be completely activated for very specific reasons. And transits is just one tool to help us navigate and identify that journey. There are lots of other techniques that can be used as well, but unless you're actually a qualified or a qualified astrologer who understands various methods and techniques and so forth, you're not going to be able to do that, right? So transits is probably not that understanding transits is always so easy, because transits can be very complex as well. And you need a basic understanding of transits, of the aspects, of the archetypes, of the phases, so there's a lot in that. But most people generally will be aware that there's a new moon coming up. Well, that's a transit. There's a full moon coming up. That's a transit as well, right? Or people who have a little bit more insight will know that transiting Uranus is coming up to the top part of their chart, in the next 6 months, or whatever it may be, right? They're just sort of some basic kind of examples. But the point being that by looking back, you always learn a lot more. That's the beauty and the gift of retrospect in life in general, right? So Vesta's moving away from Saturn, but if you can think about the journey of this year, she's been in Capricorn, ever so briefly into Pisces, and then retrograded and went back into Aquarius, and has spent the second half of this year, in Aquarius. And one thing to think about when you're thinking about Vesta in these three archetypes, Aquarius, Capricorn, Aquarius, Pisces, to put them in the right order. First of all, these three signs are the last three signs of the zodiac, of the wheel. And that's an important thing to consider when you are looking at a transit in one of those signs, for instance, because those signs correspond to the collective. They correspond to your larger field of consciousness as well. They're not personal archetypes. They're not personal signs. They don't take you into a personal domain. When we are working with those archetypes, integrating them or observing them and so forth, we are looking at a much bigger picture, a cosmological, universal, collective type of picture, and how we are connecting to that, how we are integrating with that, into that. So particularly Aquarius and Pisces, Aquarius has largely got to do with our connection to humanity, how we integrate into community and society. Capricorn is a big part of that too, our integration into society, but it is very different to Aquarius. Now, traditionally, Aquarius and Capricorn are ruled by Saturn, so they both have a Saturnian element to them. But over time, since Uranus was discovered, Uranus has been associated to be connected to the archetype of Aquarius. And so in evolutionary astrology will go straight to Uranus for the rulership of Aquarius, whereas Hellenistic astrology still maintains that Saturn is the ruler of Aquarius. And personally, I look at both, and I work with both systems anyway. So I don't give more emphasis to one or the other. I understand both, and I understand that both are valuable and both are necessary to observe. So Vesta in Aquarius, whilst she speaks so much about our own personal integrative soul journey, actually, in these archetypes, it has also opened that field of the soul-focused integration from the point of view of how that is shared or viewed or understood or connected to the collective, right? That's an important theme associated with Vesta being in Aquarius, for instance, right? And also, you know, just very simply, Vesta in Aquarius could also have been for certain people the journey of certain tribes and communities that you may have connected with this year. That has been a really important focus in your life, you know. You might be one of those people that loves to feel like you're in a part of a community, you know, of some sort. That, you know, some people just love that kind of community sort of setup, right? You know, some people prefer to just do their own thing, right? So we all have different ways of relating and living and wanting to experience our life. But if it's not a community theme for you, it might be a friendship, you know, because Aquarius corresponds to friendships as well. So you could have established a really important friendship this year, for instance, that's been very helpful to the journey of your own soul. Vesta, soul work, which takes you deep into that heart flame, basically. The Saturn conjunct there has brought about matters of being able to harness and focus and discipline that energy, but it could also have brought about matters of separating from certain communities, certain tribes. Separation is the word that immediately comes to mind when Saturn is present. On the other hand, Saturn conjunct Vesta can also speak to just how serious you've taken on a particular project, and just how dedicated and how disciplined you've been with it, right? On the other hand, the imbalance and shadow side to that conjunction would be feeling, you know, the demands and responsibilities of what's expected of you out there, of the world, as it were. And the Saturn creating a bit of a burdensome type of feeling, like, you know, I have to do this, I have to do that, I have to commit to this, I've got this deadline, I've got that, you know, I've got so many things to do. And so there can be this enormous built-up of pressure of feeling the burden of what Saturn is presenting. So the way to balance that energy with Saturn Vesta is to simply recognize that, yes, there is a time for work, and Vesta is the goddess of work as well. It's the work of the soul, but if we want to translate that to the external sort of reality and field, it can be connected to the work that you do, as in paid work or as in charity, service, or whatever, right? So the shadow there is to not fall into the trap of just, you know, doing the complete Saturn thing and denying yourself of any time out, you know, playtime, fun time, enjoyment time, because Saturn is a very serious energy. It's very, there's nothing fun about Saturn at all. So when you think about Saturn, it's not like, if Saturn walks up to you, he's not going to walk up to you with a big, radiant, warm smile and give you a nice, big, warm, fuzzy hug. That would be Jupiter. Saturn will come along with his little sickle and remind you of the hard work that needs to be attended to. And, you know, sometimes that's necessary, but sometimes Saturn plays these psychological tricks on us that can make us feel, it's a harsh energy, you know, it can make us feel alone, isolated, excluded, separated from others, lonely. It can bring up depression. You know, there's lots of complex layers to Saturn. But as time progresses, which is not too far, on the 21st of November, Vesta moves back into Pisces, as I mentioned before, and on the 23rd of January, she will form a conjunction to Neptune in Pisces. I think that's a really interesting transit, actually. It's the complete opposite to the conjunction she's had to Saturn. The Saturn is the boundaries and the structure and the form of anything you've been working on and creating and really focused on. Focus, Vesta, work, Saturn, self-discipline, both Saturn and Vesta. And when Vesta comes to Neptune, Neptune is boundless, so it has no boundaries, it has no limits, it has no defining structure whatsoever. It speaks to spirit, oneness, wholeness, integration, and our spiritual awareness, awakening, spirit body, connection to the divine, the understanding and awareness of that, what that feels like, how we nurture that, how we integrate that, further integrate it. So there's very, very strong implication there of deep, deep, deep spiritual achievement, right? If we want to use that word, although achievement is more of a word of Saturn and Capricorn. But let's just say integration, perhaps that's probably a better word. Deep in, because Vesta herself speaks to the integrative process that we go through to establish a deeper connection with our own soul. That's what she reflects, essentially. So coming to a conjunction with Neptune, there can be, so here's some other themes that could show up. You know, sacrifice comes to mind immediately because Neptune and Vesta, as a matter of fact, particularly in Pisces, the shadow side of this energy of Vesta in Pisces conjunct Neptune can be becoming the martyr, victim, savior type of character, person, stepping into that kind of experience. And that's not an empowering experience to be a victim. So yeah, perhaps just kind of watch those sorts of themes, you know, and I mean, that can show up in a million ways, you know. And in some ways, sometimes sacrificing something of ourself in a healthy way to bring some goodness or to bring something to somebody else or to a community or to something other than ourselves can be a very beautiful thing and a very rewarding experience as well. So there's that, but I guess, you know, it's really about noticing if there is sacrifice involved, you know, am I am I sort of offering this in a way where I'm really clear and conscious about what I'm offering and what I'm doing? And whilst I'm giving something up of myself in this moment to give to another or to a something, am I doing it in a way where there's no abuse involved, for instance? You know, things are not out of balance. I'm not becoming somebody's victim, or I'm not becoming a martyr for somebody in a way where where dark abusive sort of things can come through. That obviously isn't a healthy way to go about it, but it will, likely happen to some people, but just, I think just from our own spiritual source and pathway, this Neptune Vesta can be it's such a beautiful marriage and body, integrated body of soul, spirit, focused, harnessed centeredness. So it holds those sorts of themes to it, and that's what we can step into with it. And by the way, that aspect of Vesta conjunct Neptune is there for about 2 weeks. It starts, it's exact on the 23rd of January, but it's sort of even before the 23rd of January, it's sort of building up. So it's going to be there for about 2 weeks' time, which is, a good amount of time to work with this energy. Also, obviously, pay attention to where the Vesta-Neptune conjunction occurs in your birth chart, because it might be aspecting certain planets in your chart. And so whatever planet it is aspecting, that will bring in another dimension of how this Vesta-Neptune energy is integrated and felt and experienced. So you've got the planets that it might aspect, and then you've got the house that it might aspect as well. And the house is extremely important because the house is, think about this, right? When you are born, there's, so many people born on the same day as you, right? So many people. And we could even say that there's a lot of people born the same time as you. And yet you'll experience a completely different life, because the soul is different in each incarnation that the soul chooses to incarnate in, right? Even though people are born at the same time. But the point I'm really making here is that knowing your time of birth and knowing your accurate time of birth is so crucial for so many reasons. But here's one reason for you to contemplate if you are not sure about your birth time or you don't understand the seriousness of just how important accurate time of birth is. Looking at this chart here, for instance, there's a 9 degrees ascendant going on here of Capricorn, right? So let's just say this was somebody's birth chart. They were born today at 11:36 a.m. Now, this is the rising sign, right? So this is the sign that's rising on the eastern horizon at that particular time, just before midday, basically. That's why the sun is up here, because midday is essentially around about this point here. If someone's born around midday, you'll always see that the sun is up here at the top part of the chart. If they're born at midnight, it will be on the opposite end. So the ascendant, roughly speaking, because it depends on the time of the year and it depends northern hemisphere, southern hemisphere, etc. But essentially this is around 6 a.m. sunrise. This is around 6 p.m. sun setting. This is midday, sun at the, what's the word? I've just forgotten the word. Anyway, it's when the sun is directly above us, right? That's midday. And midnight, when the sun is directly below, underneath our feet, as it were. People who are born around midnight, the sun is going to be down here, right? So these are really important things to kind of be aware of. Now, further to that, relative to time and understanding, why a transit is so important relative to what house it's in, because the ascendant is going to change every couple of hours, roughly speaking. And it's different in the southern hemisphere and different in the northern hemisphere. Some signs rise faster here, some signs rise slower, and the same thing goes on with the northern hemisphere. So again, roughly speaking, if your time of birth, let's just say you were born with 25 degrees of Capricorn ascendant, let's just say it was 25. Well, it's not going to be too long before it goes into the next sign, and that shifts over everything in a different house, right? There's that. And further to that, the fact that, let's just say this is somebody's chart and this person has, let me use an example where, well, let's just use the Mercury as an example. So this person's born, let's say, roughly 1136, which places Mercury very close there to the midheaven, reasonably close. It's not going to be long before that Mercury shifts into another house. Let me just show you so you can kind of get a better feel of what I'm trying to demonstrate here. Let's just go into, well, let's go minutes. Let's go 10 minutes at a time. So 10 minutes. Yeah. So about 20 minutes later, Mercury's moved over into the 9th house, right? You can see that visually, can't you? You can see that that's what I've done. I've clicked over twice, 10 minutes at a time, 20 minutes, and Mercury's now moved into the 9th. So here's what I'm getting at. Everybody born on this day is going to have Mercury at 26 degrees and 51 minutes of Virgo. But are they going to have it in the same house? Not necessarily. And so that's what personalizes the energy of the planet. First of all, Mercury is a personal planet, but not knowing where it is in the chart is a big part of the story, right? Because whatever house it's in, it's showing you that Mercury is only going to be in this house for a couple of hours, something like that. That's what personalizes the energy of the planet. So yeah, when you are looking at Saturn Vesta, as I was saying, in the sign of Pisces, you're looking at, first of all, transiting Neptune has been impacting your Pisces house for quite some time. Neptune spends, 14 years in one sign. So, you've had about, I think about 13 years or so of Neptune in Pisces, which is a long time, right? And now comes Vesta forming this conjunction in that part of your chart. So it would be good to kind of track, when did Neptune first go in that house? What's been going on with that Pisces house relative to Neptune things? If you've got no clue, and if you're totally confused, I would not be surprised, and that would make a lot of sense, because Neptune is the trickiest body to kind of get a hold of. You can't hold it. It's like water. If I was to spill this water in my hand, I can't hold it, can I? The water in this glass is Neptune. Neptune will, it's fluid in its movement. It will take on the form of whatever it projects itself into. In this case, it's the glass, so it's taken the shape of the glass. But it's not limited to this. So Neptune is this very mysterious and foggy type of energy. When we're having Neptune transits, we can be completely blissed out, completely living in fantasy land. It can be a lot of different things, it can be drugs, it can be hospital, it can be prison, it can be all those things, right? It can be complete Kundalini awakening type of things as well, depending on what it is and depending on when that Neptune transit finishes. It's when it finishes that you are able to see clearly what that experience was all about. I've got Neptune on my Venus at the moment. It's only just begun. I've got it there for nearly 2 years. So I'll keep you posted on what that's going to mean. It already has kicked off some things for me, really major things. two things that have been very devastating, actually, and very disappointing. And one thing I've always said about Neptune through the years is expect some disappointment when Neptune hits one of your personal planets. And that's exactly what happened to me. And I've known about this for over 25 years, and yet I had the disappointment. Doesn't matter how much insight and wisdom I've had, I still had that disappointment. And it was a big one. It wasn't a little thing. It was a big, 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 big thing. So that's Neptune. It's not easy to understand or to navigate. And ultimately what it comes to with Neptune is you just have to surrender. And that's indeed what I had to do to this particular incident that occurred. That was completely devastating. I just had to surrender. And that surrendering, it's like it took weeks to step into that and really accept it and really surrender and let it be, let it go. It took weeks. It's not just about saying, yeah, I'm going to surrender now. It's your body, all your different bodies, heart, mind, soul, has to come to that place. And the way it comes to that place is very unique and different for all of us. And it's not done by just saying, yes, I'm going to surrender. There's a lot of internal processing that needs to go on in order for you to arrive into that space of surrender. Because the mind and the ego and the personality never wants to surrender. It just doesn't. It's not built to surrender. It's built to basically survive, express, push through things, doesn't want to feel defeated, So the word surrender to the personality in the ego feels like a defeat, a loss. That's why Neptune brings up disappointment and loss, right? Because that's how it feels to the personality. And to understand it from that level where you have to let go of your attachments, your values, your desires, the outcome that you wanted, whatever you expected, you have to let go of all of that to even attempt to open the door to surrender. You can't open that door with those things in play, simply cannot. So perhaps with this Neptune Vesta energy there will be also a theme around surrendering in some kind of way that brings about a higher level of your own evolution moving forward, which is not understood by the left linear brain. You're not going to be able to kind of work it out in that way, but it'll slowly reveal itself to you. With Neptune, it always brings in the theme of what I'm going to come back soon and talk about Pluto transiting the 12th house or having Pluto natally in the 12th house. I absolutely still intend to do that video. I haven't as yet because I'm still finishing that cycle. I'm almost through it, very close to it. It basically finishes next year for me, around about there. And so there's such a big component of my own psyche at the moment that's it's very difficult to articulate, but there's just a lot going on internally that I'm finishing and processing, right? And so that's why I haven't done it yet, but I fully intend to, and it'll happen soon enough. But I just wanted to say with Neptune, another theme that's often very profound and indeed connects to the experience of surrender, which is what happens when Pluto goes into the 12th. It's the ultimate surrender. And that's what happens when we have Neptune transits. We have to, and I've used this metaphor before, Neptune energy, or Pluto in the 12th, it's literally like standing at the ledge of a cliff and being asked to take a dive into the abyss with no sense of security, no sense of foundation, no sense of knowing what's on the other side. That's the ultimate surrender. I've spoken about this. It's, you know, it's not an easy thing to do. We have to be, I think, at such a deep level of trust within ourselves, and trust in the divine process, what you can't see, which is the abyss. So Neptune transits can trigger those sorts of things as well. So I guess that's predominantly what I had to say about that. Now I just want to mention this lady here, because I posted this on Facebook, and I won't spend too much time on this, just mind-boggling. Hedy Lamarr, born 9th of November 1914, so it was a long time ago, was a very interesting lady. Long story short, and I'll read you what I wrote. She escaped a Nazi husband by disguising herself as her own maid, which is all the Scorpio stuff, because Scorpio is very capable of things like that. She then became a Hollywood star. Like, she was a really famous Hollywood actress, right? And then later she co-founded a system for wireless data networking after she and a guy called George Antheil conceived the idea of transmitting information in such a way that instead of being transmitted on a single frequency, it could be sent on several. That, in today's day and age, has translated into what we now recognize as Bluetooth and GPS. She was the one responsible for the birthing of that technology from basically, look at that, 1914. Well, that's when she was born. We're probably talking about, I don't know, 20 or 30 years post that date. I should track down the date, actually, of when she invented that in her own mind. Now, here's what I want to point to. Look at Jupiter-Uranus conjunction in Aquarius. These are the two bodies that connect to groundbreaking, sudden breakthroughs, in the sign of Aquarius, futuristic ideas of breakthroughs that are going to enable evolution to proceed, right? And she had a Jupiter-Uranus conjunction in Aquarius, furthermore squaring her Mercury in Scorpio. When I see Mercury-Uranus aspects, these people have a really futuristic mind. I mean, where did she come to the understanding that, a single transmission doesn't need to be single, it could be sent on several, I mean, we don't even think about that stuff, right? We take it for granted, especially today's generation, just born into, it's like when a baby's born today in the hospital, the first thing they get as a gift is probably an iPhone. But when I grew up, no such thing as iPhone. And in fact, the only thing that existed in my time when I grew up was computers, but it was those big desktop computers that most people didn't even have, right? So, how far have we come? But look at just, she was the instigator of this technology that's, it's such a big thing on the whole social collective sphere, right? So anyway, I just wanted to show that because I thought that was super interesting. This guy here, Colin Wilson, my brother brought him to my attention just yesterday because he's noticed that I've been watching and talking a lot about the Jeffrey Dahmer case and whatnot. And he said to me, oh, listen, you know, if you want to know the real deal about all of that, he goes, just go to Colin Wilson. He's written about all these serial killers and whatnot. He goes, that's where you're going to get the real hardcore, juicy truth. Because the Netflix series, as I did mention in a previous video, there are some exaggerations and some things that are not 100% correct. And that was always going to be the case because it's a fucking TV series, okay? So I always knew that. Subsequently, though, what's been released is the trial footage from when he was, when Jeffrey Dahmer went to court and was in court for, I don't know how many days it was, but anyway, that footage has been released. So doctors, forensic psychiatrists, and the surviving victim and so forth giving evidence. Well, that's been quite interesting. But now I'm interested in getting a book from this guy. I've just looked him up, and this, I don't have his time of birth, but look at his date of birth, 26th of June 1931. He was born, you know, just a year after Pluto was discovered. And Mercury in Gemini. He's written, I don't know how many books, but I reckon like at least 20. And he's written books on even, so criminology, criminal profiles, serial killers. He's gone right into occult, esoteric, astrological stuff as well. He's such a fascinating guy. And his influences were people like Gurdjieff, Carl Jung, Friedrich Nietzsche. Nietzsche, is that how you say his surname? So I'm sure somebody will pull me up on that. Somebody always pulls me up on my pronunciations. So anyway, I only just looked at his chart just a few minutes ago, and I thought, well, wow, you know, Mercury in Gemini, Venus in Gemini. That's the writing, and Moon in Scorpio, and it's probably, I would say he does have Moon in Scorpio, even though we don't have his time of birth, because of the degree that it's at 12 p.m. It's just at that point where it's likely to be in Scorpio, even if we have to take it back several hours or move forward several hours. And given that he was into the occult, which is whatever is hidden, which is Vesta, by the way, Vesta would be the most perfect symbol to reflect feminine, divine feminine, occult wisdom. That's what she would represent. So he's got Moon in Scorpio. There's his interest in serial killers, crimes, you know, things of that nature, the esoteric occult world, etc., etc. And Saturn in Capricorn, you know, and there's Vesta, right? Conjunct his Saturn. So there's his focus, drive, ambition, and success that he was able to accomplish during his life relative to becoming like a pretty well-renowned author who had tremendous insight, investigative skills and powers, truth seeker. He's just an extraordinary guy. I've only just found out about him, so I'm only just scratching the surface, but we can see the astrological symbolism. Even Pluto Jupiter is one of the most powerful aspects to have. You know, it's the ability to regenerate and reinvent and inspire in the biggest ways possible with whatever you inject that energy into. It's an amazing aspect to have, Jupiter Pluto. So when you see that even as a transit in your chart, pay attention, because that is likely to be the time when you completely change your life in a way that you want to, in a way that's truly beneficial for you. You know, it gives you that juice and power to do so. So anyway, I just wanted to mention a little bit of that as well and leave it there. And yeah, full moon is ready to kick off, and there's not been good things so far. So I've been feeling it building up the last 2 nights, and I haven't been able to sleep very well at all the last 2 nights. I can feel that fire of Aries, because I am an Aries. So it's yeah. Well, I think especially with what I saw in Thailand yesterday, that was well. They said that's the most in one sort of rampage, if you like. That's the highest number of kids that have been killed, because in the USA we know there's been many of those sorts of incidences, shootings in schools and stuff like that, which always disturbs me. Little kids, innocent little beautiful little kids, just their life just being robbed. It's very tragic. But anyway, 37 total in Thailand. That's a big number. And I wouldn't be surprised if there's more of that kind of stuff that come, not necessarily that specifically, but some other things, although I think that's quite enough, to bring about a sense of collective grief in some kind of way. Because if that didn't bother you or bring up a sense of sadness and empathy and compassion for those parents that lost their children, then you're probably a sociopath. All right, I'm going to go, and I'll see you guys soon. I hope that the full moon brings some courage for you, so utilizing it in a way positively, with conscious courage, so that something good can come out of it, because it is a very, very, very volatile and sensitive and explosive full moon. So see you soon. Thanks for watching.